The Phoenix Suns are in an incredibly difficult spot right now because in a Western Conference in which it feels like everybody else is getting better, there are teams that are getting younger, there are teams that have more flexibility, that have added pieces this offseason. The Suns are just sitting there getting older, and it's almost like they've been left behind. But on the bright side for Suns fans, Matt Ishbia has a plan. The owner of the Suns came out and said, okay, this is what we're going to do over the next couple of seasons. This is our goal. And basically said their goal is still absolutely to compete for titles. But the more interesting part of it is the timeline in which he framed it, essentially saying that the Suns are on a 2-year window. They have this year and they have next year to fully compete. And then after that, there's going to be some changes. Now, more specifically, what he's referring to is, of course, the second apron, something that I'm probably going to say on this channel 100 times this year. And essentially, he said the second apron is okay as long as we get out of it in 2 seasons. They were in it last year, they're in it this year, and they're going to be in it next year. After that, they're going to work to get out from under the second apron. This is a payroll threshold at which there are some punishments most directly related and most concerningly related to your draft picks. You can see them on screen here. Essentially, what the Suns are trying to avoid is if you are in the second apron for 3 out of 5 years, your first round pick from 7 years out is not able to be traded, and that pick automatically goes to the end of the first round once you are in the apron for 3 years out of 5. And so Ishbia basically came out and said, our plan is apron for the next 2 years, and then we're going to start cutting some spending. And the interesting part of that to me is how that lines up with the contracts in the future in Phoenix. Because if you look, Bradley Beal technically could be a 2026 free agent. He has a $56 million player option. Feel like he's probably going to pick that one up. But also, Kevin Durant and, less importantly, Jusuf Nurkic are both free agents in 2 seasons. They're both summer of 2026 free agents, the exact offseason in which Matt Ishbia is saying, we're going to get out from under the second apron, we're going to cut our spending. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to still try and compete and that they're going to just lose Kevin Durant, but it is interesting that every single player on the roster, with the exception of Grayson Allen and Devin Booker, are not signed long-term beyond the exact summer in which the owner of the team is talking about cutting costs. Now, from a team building perspective, this makes a ton of sense if you're Phoenix. These penalties for being in the second apron so many years in a row are put there for a reason. The league does not want teams to be spending as much money as they would if they were in the apron multiple years in a row. Now, teams like the Celtics that just won the title and are bringing back all their players and look to continue to be contenders for the next couple of seasons, they're okay with these draft pick restrictions. But the Suns are not the Celtics. They were the 6th seed in the West last year. They didn't win a single playoff game. And going into this season, you could argue that they are certainly not higher than 6th and might not even be a real playoff team. They might be a play-in team or worse. When you look at the Western Conference, these are teams that I 100% like better and would rank ahead of Phoenix going into the season. Dallas, Denver, OKC, Minnesota, and Memphis. Memphis, a team that I need to make a video on because everybody's just forgetting that this was a great regular season team a couple of seasons ago for multiple years in a row. I like all those teams better than Phoenix. I think all those teams are in a different tier, potentially 2 tiers above this Phoenix team. And Phoenix probably finds themselves more in the tier of Golden State, Sacramento, the Clippers, the Pelicans, the Lakers, and then maybe the Rockets, and then maybe even the Spurs if you want to throw them in there, depending on how awesome Wemby is this upcoming season. That is a tier of teams that are probably going to be pretty good, probably going to win 45 plus games, but in a loaded Western Conference, that doesn't really mean anything. And for a team like Phoenix that is as all in as they are, that has given up as many future picks and has spent as much money as they have, that's just not where they expect to be. Not to mention the fact that their success is built around primarily an older player. Kevin Durant's 35, Bradley Beal's 31, Devin Booker is still not even 30 yet, but they're a couple of injuries away, a bad break away from not even making the play-in. I just named 11 teams in the Western Conference, and then maybe 12 if you want to put San Antonio in there, that might be better than Phoenix this year. And if that happens, if they have a couple bad breaks, how much of a disaster would it be if the Suns just straight up didn't make the playoffs? Now, getting back to the timeline of all this, it doesn't necessarily mean that in 2 seasons, the Suns are going to get rid of all their players and they're just going to be bad, because they can still operate in the luxury tax but below the second apron and field a competitive team. Certainly because of the way that the salary structures work, if Beal accepts his player option and then Booker's still on his deal and they sign Kevin Durant to a new contract, just with those 3 guys, they won't be over the apron. Now, they'll be kind of close once they start filling out the rest of the roster, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Kevin Durant, Jusuf Nurkic, these guys are going to be on different teams in 2026. But it does add a level of contention to this whole situation in Phoenix, because You have to risk the possibility of Kevin Durant potentially wanting to go somewhere else in 2026, and you keep in mind the draft pick responsibilities that they hold to these other teams all the way out until 2029 and what the team would look like if Kevin Durant is no longer on it. You also have to deal with the contract extension negotiations with Durant, figuring out what that number should be when he's going to be 37 years old at the time the new contract kicks in. And Durant is probably looking at the situation and wondering, is this something that I want to sign back up for in 2 seasons, when they have said publicly that they're not going to try and compete, be as all in as they have been over the last couple of seasons, when at that point he could still be looking for that non-Golden State Warriors ring and have real options out there in free agency as a 37-year-old in 2026 to potentially still get a max contract, and a contract that Phoenix might not be willing to give him. And so while I understand the plan, I understand the idea of let's compete for 2 seasons, let's establish that as our window, that's probably our window anyway, and then after that we'll start to slow down some of the spending, potentially reset some things around Devin Booker. I understand that concept. I just don't understand why we need to say it out loud. I don't understand why Ishbia needs to say this publicly, because if I'm Kevin Durant, if I'm Devin Booker, if I'm, I guess, Bradley Beal, Yusuf Nurkic, some of these other guys, I'm looking at that and wondering, okay, so yeah, the 2 seasons thing makes sense because we're older, but after that, I'm out. Like, even someone like Devin Booker, if they're not going to try and compete, this is a guy that has been to a finals, that has won 60 games in a season. Like, he's used to competing at this point, is used to his teams being involved and being competitive. And if that's not going to be the stated goal of the organization anymore, if the stated goal of the organization 2026 and beyond is to make sure they're not over the second apron, well, he can just go somewhere else and go to a team that's willing to spend that much money. And also, you know, the Suns can achieve their goal of getting rid of some salary because Devin Booker wouldn't be there anymore. And really, Booker is the key point here, because that is the thing that I think allowed them to go as all in as they have, that allowed them to feel comfortable trading picks away so far into the future, because Booker is still, he's on a completely different timeline than someone even like Durant, who's 35. He's 27, 28 years old. Even in 2026, he's going to be approaching 30, but not quite there, with a game that should age well. And if he shows no indications of wanting to leave, you can still put a competitive team around Devin Booker, even if you have to trade KD in a year or he leaves in 2 seasons or whatever the case may be. You still have that guy. And I think he's really the pivot point of all of this. If this whole conversation, this plan of not being as good in 2 seasons, if that rubs him the wrong way and he requests a trade, then things could completely fall apart for Phoenix. But in a more immediate sense, the question around all of this is, within this 2-year window, is Phoenix going to get even remotely close to competing for a title? Are they good enough at all, even when healthy, to compete with the Denvers, the Minnesotas, the OKCs, the Dallases of the world? Probably not right now, and that is a concerning place to be for a team that owes as many future picks as they do, that is as expensive as they are, and is clearly already looking at making some changes within the next couple of seasons.